The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning. Do a little adjusting. It's good to see everyone this morning. So for those that are new, just roll to see. Are you having a hard time hearing me? Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Now better. Yeah.
Better? Okay. Now let's see. I'm gonna move that closer. I'll turn that up. Zoom. So tired of it. And I'm so grateful. If there's anyone who's new, welcome to Stone Creek. This is our online Sunday Dharma talk. My name is Sarah, or Dōjin, and I use the pronouns she and her. And this morning, I'd like to share some thoughts I've been having about a view and views. and in Buddhism, we have a real foundational teaching in Buddhism are the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. And our practice intensive in March will be on the Eightfold Noble Path. And so the Four Noble Truths, just as a review, this is the essential teaching of what the Buddha woke up to, that there is suffering, the truth of suffering, that there's a cause of suffering, that's craving often for things to be otherwise. The third is that there is cessation, there's a possibility to end or stop at the root, the suffering. And the way to do that is practice, and specifically the practice of the Eightfold Path. And the first of the Eightfold Path, we can look at the Eightfold Path, I think like all Buddhist teachings, when you get lists like this, it's interesting to both take them as not linear and also as linear, both. So there's a way we can look at the Eightfold Path where it doesn't go in any particular order. And there's also a way that we can look at the Eightfold Path where it does go in an order. And it's very interesting for me anyway to look at it that way, where the foundation is skillful, or what's often rendered as right view. And again, just quickly, right view or more often we've been using the term skillful, or last week when Lynn was talking about this, she was saying an aligned view, a view, and for me, the best description of it is a view that's aligned with reality. And reality being that all things are in a network of interconnection, that we are here together. And as I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking on these two planes that are like three-dimensional spheres. I don't know how you would render that, but there's one plane, there's almost like a material and present plane. We human beings and all beings are connected. Everyone who's in a material reality right now, we're all connected to one another. And we are also connected, maybe in the opposite, what do you call that? Hemisphere, alignment with the past and the future. So our sense, so when we come from a place of right view, we're coming from a place of including all beings, past, present, and future. And when our actions come from that place, they tend to be more skillful. They tend to be more aligned with our deepest values and our inmost requests. But to begin today, I'd like to start with the video, sharing the video of Amanda Gorman's poem from the inauguration in her own voice. And many of you may have heard this already. It's in some ways, I think, overnight, she probably became the most famous person in the world, which is wonderful. My invitation for us this morning is to receive, like to sit in meditation posture and receive these words as a Dharma teaching, if we can. And receive her or hear her as the teacher and an elder that she is. So let me know if this isn't working, but I'm gonna try to do the screen share. Oh, wait a second, I need to go back actually. Hold on. Because I learned something yesterday. Okay, here we go.
You ready for tonight? As ready as can be.
I forgot to cue it through the ad. Okay, hang on. What am I gonna do? Let's just see if we can not hear the ad. No. Oh, I can't see also.
Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert How could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Did that work?
You ready for tonight?
Ah!
As ready as can be.
That's dangerous. Okay. Let's put that away. Okay. It was better this morning. I had just... Anyway, thank you for being there with all of us and receiving that as we are. So I want to take some of Amanda Gorman's teachings and also weave in some teachings that I've been receiving from the book Cast that the Racial Literacy and Dharma book group are reading over 3 months. It's by Isabel Wilkerson. So one thing Ms. Gorman offers is, because being American isn't a pride we inherit, it's a past we step into and how we repair it. In the book Cast, Isabel Wilkerson uses the analogy somewhat in the beginning of the book of what it means to own an old home. And I know I've talked about that at Stone Creek before. When if we become the quote owners of an old home, if we imagine ourselves that way, if we have that view, we come into a physical place that we didn't make. The issues that an old house has, we're not responsible for them, but they are ours to work with. And how do we do that? She asks over and over again throughout the book. And one of the things that she suggests is that we have to go down into the basement and see what's there. We have to look into the nooks and crannies, actually, as Ms. Gorman often mentions, the places we don't really want to look. You know, if there's a bulging wall, maybe we'd rather not see why, but we actually need to investigate. And that's what our practice supports us to do. Our time, you know, in a house, and we can have this idea that we own a house and that it's ours, quote, forever, you know, but there's no such thing. Not even in our bodies, not even in our lifetimes. It's also a right view to understand the impermanence of our situation. And also, we can make a commitment as beings and as bodhisattvas or as people interested in the bodhisattva work in the world, we can make a commitment that in this impermanent time that we have, we will leave things better than we found it. And that Amanda Gorman points to as well. Let's leave behind a country better than we were left. Another, and there's so many pieces of this poem that are so stirring, but another she says is that we've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notion of what just isn't always justice. So another thing we need to do as people interested in walking the path of reducing suffering in the world is to look deeply into what we've inherited, both in the material plane, but also in the plane of conditioning. To look into the norms and notions of what just is and see if that really does ring true with what we actually believe, and if it rings true with reality. Are the ways that we've learned to look at the world reflective of a reality in which not only are we all connected, but actually all beings have equal worth and value? And if we look into the world that we live in, and by we, I mean all of us in our variability, does our world reflect that view that all beings, that we're connected to all beings and that everyone's equally valuable? I think it was also in Cass that she mentions these videos, and I went and looked them up, of English people being asked about if they could guess the cost of American healthcare. So these are folks who live in the United Kingdom who have the National Health Service where healthcare is free. In fact, I was talking about these videos with my friend and Dharma's sister, Mary Stairs, who's Canadian. And she said, you know, Sarah, in America, in the United States, people have this idea that you have a right to a gun. She said, in Canada, people have a sense that you have a right to healthcare in the same way. Like it's a right, like it's a God-given right. So these folks in England, when the interviewer is asking them, I wish I could, if I was better at queuing up videos, I won't put you through that again. But so he says, so one example is, how much do you think it costs for an ambulance to come by your house? And the interviewee says, there's a cost for that? And the interviewer says, yes. And the guy says, I don't know, maybe $100? And the interviewer says, no, it's more. And he says, $200? And the interviewer says, $2,500 on average. And the interviewee says, why? And I was so struck, you know, why? There are reasons for this. And they come from views of things. They come from collective views of things. It's interesting that people in the United States, I mean, maybe some of you, we do, but for the most part, we don't say why, you know, we say how much when we're dealing with things of healthcare. Probably I wonder if every one of us here in our time living in the United States has actually foregone medical treatment because we're like, well, it would cost so much, you know. That may not be the view that we all have, but predominantly there's a view that this is not a right, it's something we can purchase. And if we have the wealth, we have access to it. And in those interviews also, when they're talking about the cost of EpiPens and inhalers, one young woman says, if you're poor, you're screwed. And that's true. You know, when healthcare is something you can buy, if you don't have economic access, your life is threatened. And for the most part, at least in the way things function and how we do, that seems to be a view that many of us in the United States are okay with. But for me, it doesn't align with skillful view, where all beings are equally valuable. I've been disturbed by the lack of national health care since I was a child, by the way. Like, I just remember thinking, like, I heard that a child died because his mother couldn't afford the $3,200 treatment. And I was struck that his life seemed to have had been put that value. And that's when I started thinking about how much I wanted to move to Sweden when I was like 13. And I haven't made it there yet, unfortunately. So another view that that Isabel Wilkerson talks about in Cass, and that is one that I think about often too, is a view of scarcity, a mind of scarcity. And again, in the United States, if we look into how things work, a mind of scarcity is often a collective view, or at least a view that many people are holding. And one of the things that she says in Cass that was so helpful to me in understanding, just actually the perpetuation of racism. So Cass is talking about racism in terms of caste, and that actually the systems in the United States is a caste system where race is a marker. And the perpetuation of that, like, why is that? Why do people want to uphold this? And she says, if we're coming from a vantage point of scarcity, then equality is seen as a demotion. It's a loss. And she's particularly talking about the impact of lower income whites. And I think about this a lot because the family I grew up in was, for the most part, working class white people. And I think about in anti-racist efforts and anti-racist practice, one of the things that has been helpful to me, that I've learned from others and that I try to support other people in doing, is looking at our racial conditioning, looking at, like, what did I inherit around race? Like, what were the actual, like, can I remember? I mean, a lot of conditioning is so below the radar, below our conscious memory, but we can try to look into, like, what are the memories we have, or pivotal moments where we saw our own race or understood the messages we were getting about other people's races. And I often think about my Uncle Jimmy, who was my great uncle, who was verbosely racist with his language. He was racist with his thinking and his language, and expressive. And he was somebody I didn't like to be around when I was a child. I was afraid of him, actually, but I was also quite irritated by him. But I was a kid, and he was an old man. And he's very loud. And but I remember understanding, even as a small child, I remember, and maybe my parents helped me understand this, or that was the context they give, that he would be abusive with his language around race because he was insecure in his own status and in his own worth. And actually his story is he has a story of a tremendous amount of trauma, an unusual amount of trauma and neglect in his life. And that doesn't excuse it, but it does, like, make sense of it. It's sort of, in a way, for me, that there was such a sense of lack, that for him, a sense of status and self-worth was a commodity that was limited. And so for any time he could push someone below him was the only way he ever felt like he was up. And in caste, Isabel Wilkerson also talks about the hand-wringing of white liberals, and the pondering of why do so many working class white people, quote, vote not in their own interests. So why would people who are struggling economically vote for people who really don't champion their interests in terms of their political activity? But she's like, what she proposes is that if we have that pondering, that maybe we turn our understanding to see that if a sense of status and worth is seen as a limited commodity, then people are, even white poor folks or people who are struggling economically who are white, are voting in their own interests when they are voting to keep the racial hierarchy as it is, because that's a feeling. Otherwise, they have a feeling that their well-being is threatened. And that also explained a lot to me about my extended family. And truthfully, all of these thoughts were alive for me as I was watching the attempted insurrection in the Capitol. My daughter showed me a meme that said, I don't mean to minimize the violence of what happened in the Capitol. And people have, used humor to deal with things that are confusing. One thing that was being passed around was an image of the armed insurrectionists, and then words that said, people who would literally storm the Capitol instead of going to therapy. And again, it made me think of my extended family, where, healing the wounds of neglect and trauma in my extended family was not actually an option. There was no, sometimes I do, I learned this from Reverend Leanne, like you go back to a memory that was traumatic and you redo it, and you are imagining. So sometimes I go back to my early childhood family and I imagine them having vulnerable conversations about their pain. And I also know that there was nothing in their structures of conditioning that allows for them to do that. It wasn't possible. So all the ways that they were defended were just their ways of coping. And it also, and when I think about that, I feel flooded with gratitude that many things happened that supported me to think differently. When I think about equality, I just think it's more aligned with reality. I get really excited, actually. When I think about multiplicity, I think it's a better world. It's a truer world, actually. When everyone's there in the fullness of who and what we are, including the things that we've been told we're not allowed to include, that is a truer form of reality. We're actually living together. And thusly, we are more likely to kind of live skillfully. A friend of mine and a Dharma sister who's a teacher in a different tradition was talking about one thing that's really needed, in her opinion, right now in the United States is to come from the mind or the view of the gift and of offering. And as she was describing this, she said that the opposite of hoarding is a view of circulating and circulation. Hoarding instead of stockpiling, or I mean circulation instead of stockpiling, and circulation really as a remedy for the fear that leads to hoarding and stockpiling. It's the opposite of scarcity, to come from a mind of offering and gift and circulating. And she offered, I like that word circulating in particular has been really useful to me since I've heard that. So that the gifts that we have, there's a freedom to just like, it's okay to let them go. It's okay to let them go into the field of reciprocity that is the web of connection. And this to me is really supportive for engaging the practice of skillful view. It's all right. You don't have to hang on. It's small, but I've been working on just clearing out things in our house and letting go, even just of clothes that nobody's using. And some of them have sentimental value, and some of them I keep, but then sometimes just holding and being like, sending them off with like, may you bring joy to someone else. Our practice supports actually the mind that allows that, the freedom in that, and there is joy in that. Another thing that Amanda Gorman points to, I think, what I appreciate so much was that she didn't merely rest in something that was hopeful. She named, we are bruised, but we are whole. And that we might not want this time of reckoning that we're all living in. She says, this era of redemption we feared in its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter. May it be so. May her faith in us be so. And then last night I was reading a book by a man named Larry Ward, who's a Buddhist teacher in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, called America's Racial Trauma, An Invitation to Heal. And he points to this too, that in order to imagine into, for us to be in equality in the United States, first of all, would be something we've never done before. We can think that this is a foundational principle of the United States, but actually it's never been actualized. And democracy has never been actualized because it's been so denied many people. But we can But in order for us to like, we can look into the past, see what pieces are there that are worth keeping. Like when you go through your closet, what pieces are worth keeping, and what can we, but maybe not so much that the ones we want to let go of are going to bring joy, but that there's some that we need to like deliberately let go of. But to do that, we need to consciously look into what we collectively hold. So Larry Ward says, echoing the Buddha's model of the mind, Sigmund Freud and others have revealed that we are being subject to subconscious processes influencing our thinking, speech, and behaviors. Repression and denial of our unconscious mind leads to pathology, or as the Buddha would call it, suffering. Unless we choose to live more deeply than shallow awareness allows, it can be difficult to see what I mean by America's racial karma and observe its turning. We will need to look beyond our contented shallowness into the roots of our racialized consciousness if we truly desire to heal and transform our past, present, and future. As students of the Dharma, we know our collective awareness is ultimately impermanent. Ideas that seem set in stone and immovable may in fact change. In fact, they are bound to change. If we look deeply into the mind and body's role in creating, nurturing, and protecting our racialized awareness and its actions, we can see an opportunity for transformation. America's racial karma invites us to be attentive to our heart's conditioning. It invites us to embrace our shared racial trauma at its roots and heal our compromised social imagination, so we may be the ones who come through the mists of racial ignorance into what we may call a good society. So another collective view that I think we hold in the United States, or the dominant culture holds in the United States, is a view of hierarchy and of supremacy. That there are some people who are more valuable than others. It's actually the view that we tend to think that we hold is all people are created equal, or all men are created equal. But the actions of our society show a bunch of preferential treatment, and the lack of overturning that shows that there's a certain amount of okayness that we all share, or that we collectively share. Many of us as Americans, if I'm talking about Americans, are not okay with it. And also, but it persists. Because I think there are ideas about some people being more deserving than others. And again, this is the opposite of right view. And Isabel Wilkerson throughout the book talks about the perils of what happens when people are given authority and roles of leadership when that's not their natural inclination. Because the caste system, as she proposes it works in the United States, is just based on physical traits that we're born with, predominantly skin color, but other ones as well. And it doesn't, it's not, many people are put in positions of power where they're not naturally empathetic. They're not actually good at leading. They haven't healed. They haven't looked into their conditioning and considered what's there. They haven't healed their wounds. They don't have a feeling of reciprocity. I mean, we just spent a number of years with somebody in a tremendous amount of power who doesn't have very good leadership skills, if any. They had good coercion skills, but they don't actually have a natural inclination to leadership. So we can look at, we can look deeply though, and look subtly as practitioners of the Dharma, like what were we told though? And we should acknowledge that a lot of the conditioning that we have that's foundational was formed when we were very little. It wasn't with a mature mind that these things were laid down. And we can be tender with ourselves about that in that investigation. And we may find though, that there are things in there that say that some people are more deserving than others. There's conversely, there's interviews with Americans about the national health system in England. And there are people who are like, well, I don't think people should have healthcare if they can't get it together to get a job with benefits. That is a feeling of hierarchy. It's a feeling that some are deserving and some are not. And it's a view that's, I would say, is pretty widely held, actually. And in our history, there's this offering, all, and I'm going to change it to people. All people are created equal. What would it look like for us to really live that out? And by here, I mean we and us as people in the United States. So I want to offer another view that's quite different. And this came from, I was really, I went to, I just got to sit in on a teacher's Sangha meeting at the East Bay Meditation Center. And the East Bay Meditation Center is a place that every time, whenever I have the opportunity to engage there, I learn so much. And it's, as we've talked about before, it's founded on an idea of radical inclusivity. And the teacher, this teacher training really was about a concept called access intimacy. And as a great example of circulating and of circulating and holding that view, I reached out to the teacher, Deborah Kerr, who offered that training and just said, oh, could you just point me in the direction of that article you were quoting for? And instead, she sent me all her notes from that presentation, which is so lovely, you know, to share, like just so easy. I said, you know, I'd love to bring this to my Sangha, this idea of access intimacy. And the idea of access intimacy comes from disability activists and organizers world. And it applies across all marginalized groups of people. And this was, she was quoting from a woman named Mia Mingus, who's a disability activist. And she's describing this experience that she has when her access needs are seen and either attempted to be met or met. She makes it really clear, like, doesn't really matter if they're even met. It's just that it's this, that they're seen and that someone is trying. That sometimes it can be another person with physical disability. I think that's the disability she works with, but maybe not. It's just that someone is there, and she's describing it so beautifully. Like, it's a kind of intimacy when someone sees you in your wholeness that is that's so beautiful and so empowering. And what she said that struck me so deeply was, it reminds me of my magnificence and my dignity. And I sat there for a moment and I just thought of all of the marginalized pieces of myself and of people I love, and realized that, and I could just, actually the first thing I thought of was the Buddha's awakening, when he says, or when in the Mahayana tradition we say, he says, I together with all beings awaken. And this idea of magnificence, the magnificence of the particularity of each person being fully realized. That our magnificence is not that we're better than, it doesn't come from supremacy. It comes from our wholeness. And the next thought I had actually when I first heard it was, how many of us feel our magnificence, or we're taught to feel that? And even though I'm sitting here like valuing that so much, have I supported the children that I'm raising in this world to feel their magnificence? And I am not, you know, not fully. And I can account for, you know, my children. I'm not the only factor in their life. That's probably mostly for the good, but it's certainly for the humbling. You know, the dominant society does not, I would say, in my experience and in the experience I have as a parent, does not support us to abide in the full magnificence of our wholeness. In fact, most of the time it tells us we need to change what we are in order to belong. And though, are abiding in our own magnificence and the magnificence of everyone around us, I think is an engagement and an expression, a beginning and a place to start from of skillful and aligned view, a view that will allow us to move into the world with liberative and freeing potential. In the Zen tradition, we have the teaching that is always brought forth in our formal meal ceremony of giver, receiver, and gift. This is a teaching, I think, of skillful view. We have it right there, this teaching of the circulation and reciprocity. And then what's important to remember is that right view is the ground that we stand on to engage in the world and engage in activity. Crystal Johnson, who's here this morning, turned me on to a quote from Jan Willis, who's a Buddhist teacher. And what she says is, the thing I've learned about hope is that it grows from action, not from thought. If we wish to see an enlightened world of peace and justice for all, we have to move beyond merely imagining into it to nonviolent actions, however small, that will help to usher it in. So we can remember that the Eightfold Path is eightfold. And every moment, actually, we can engage the whole 8 folds of them. We land in right view, and then we move into thought and speech and action, effort, livelihood, mindfulness, and meditation. And this was so resonant for me of the end of what Amanda Gorman offered. When the day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light if we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you very much. So it's a little longer, but that's because of the video. But thank you again for receiving that. And let's please have any thoughts or comments. And again, I want to welcome, and this also is a practice, I would say, of skillful view and of inclusivity to pause for a minute and to leave space so that folks who aren't always comfortable talking can have a few seconds to gather themselves and maybe talk. And when we made this recommendation again last Sunday, when Reverend Land was speaking, then there was like a long pause. And then because we were muted, I turned to Charlie and I was like, should I do something? He's like, you did just invite an uncomfortable pause. So that's right. I was like, oh, that's right, I just did. So I invited again. I won't feel offended or unmet if it takes a few minutes. And also just to say, if you don't often speak, maybe this is the week so we can include your voice. And if you'd like to speak, please just unmute and go ahead.
Dōjin,
Yes.
I just want to say thank you. I think this is one of the, I don't know, deepest, and it's touched me so deeply, your talk today. There's so much to think about, and I look forward to seeing it again. I don't really have anything intelligent to say except thank you and deep gratitude for what you bring to us.
Thank you, Cindy, for offering your voice.
Thank you, Sarah, very much for the talk and bringing so many factors and influences together today. It was powerful. And I was struck by many parts of it, including the part of coming from the mind of offering a gift, versus scarcity too. Powerful, and I'm left feeling hopeful with action. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. What I forgot to include was that when my friend Marga was offering that teaching, she was named something from a book called Sacred Economics that says it's an immature ecosystem that functions on competition. And it's a mature, so that conversely, a mature ecosystem functions with reciprocity. And I like that idea. Last week when Lynn was teaching, there was this possibility she was saying of, well, maybe the United States is an adolescent, and maybe we are growing up and we're going through that painful time of growing up and taking responsibility. And I think of that that coming from that vantage point of it, I think abundance is hard because we don't always feel that, but from a gift or from circulation is often a more mature stance that can be helpful.
I wanted to thank you for reminding. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me. I just couldn't hear myself. For reminding me of the first of the Eightfold Path, the right view, which can include all the others. Once we see and behave without prejudice and without inherited categories, we already have made a great step. If we don't do that, the rest of it doesn't follow. And I love the fact that view is also very used in the everyday discourse as, how do you see that? Or what's your point of view on this? Or what a strange view you have of, it's a very easy to understand way of describing what people think and what we think. And anyway, enough said. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I would offer that in my experience of anti-racist practice, it's not so much that I'm just going to mute you, Michael, because there's some background noise there. It's not so much actually that we're going to ever operate not from our conditioned views, so much as we're going to keep our conditioned views in our conscious view, and we're going to keep checking them with our inmost requests and skillful view, and tempering them. The reason I think that's important is because it's a little different, and I think it's so aligned with practice in the sense like it's always effortful. It will always be effortful to not come from a vantage point for myself, I can say, of white supremacy and the elements of that include scarcity thinking, that include an idea that some people are more valuable than others. And I can have skillful effort, and skillful livelihood and skillful engagement and skillful thinking, and try always to keep that in my consciousness so that I can enact something different. But I think they're so deep in there, we never graduate from that effort. And there's something quite joyful when we see ourselves able to do something other than what we were taught. So like, for example, if we could have the thought that everybody does deserve healthcare. Human beings deserve healthcare. And this view of scarcity, even just economically in the United States, that's just a lie. The United States is an incredibly wealthy country. We have the resources, you know. And if we can turn that thinking to be like, until that's done, like, I'm not going to settle, because it's not okay that people are dying because this other predominant view that I grew up with is still really predominant. You know, there's joy in that, like, I have some agency. I have some agency to enact bodhisattvahood.
Dōjin,
Yeah, right.
the reference to circulation, that was a book?
That was, it was a teaching that my teacher and friend Margot Lauba was giving. The book that she referenced about immature ecosystems was called Sacred Economies, I believe. I'll email you that if I got that wrong.
I'll also take a look.
Eisenstein, maybe is his name.
Okay, I'll take a look and see if I can find a link for the chat too.
Okay. Yeah, and another place I recommend, and if that is interesting to open more, is the Robin Wall Kimmerer. I can't remember. I'm saying her last name incorrectly, I think. But she wrote the book Braiding Sweetgrass. The whole book is about indigenous systems of reciprocity, and how, you know, that was pre-colonialism. Most economies in the United States were ones of reciprocity and with indigenous cultures. And as I read that book, I realized, like, those are also sewn into the land we live on, and they're still here, and we can access that teaching and realize them also. You know, they far predate colonial capitalism. So they've got deeper roots if we want to try to help nourish them, even if that's not our culture. Okay.
Well, while you were talking, I was thinking about the view that is America, and the like. There's a way that it names a collective. You know, it names a belonging, and then there's a way that it names a separation, and the view that is America is just so dramatically different depending on who you're talking to. You know, the America that stormed the Capitol. The America that, you know, includes people trying to get universal health care, and just kind of reflecting on how, I don't know quite what to say, how ephemeral, like what a complete delusion the idea of America is, and sort of the need to kind of live in that delusion in a skillful way, or to not get caught in it, or to not concretize it. You know, so when in the poem, you know, she's talking about America, I was thinking, yeah, you know, if we can re-envision America, if we can kind of break down all the stuff that's in the closet and in the basement and stuff like that, and kind of have the view of America, but not a concrete view of America, not a limiting or a killing view of America.
Yeah, living, dynamic, changing, multiplicitous.
Impermanent non-self America.
Non-self America. Yeah, we Buddhists have a lot to offer. That makes me think, Crystal, of there's a song and a pretty profound video by Childish Gambino called "This Is America," which I recommend. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that in a talk before too. If you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out. It's a view of America from a Black man's perspective, you know. And it's, yeah, and I think I was at a meeting with Crystal before saying, you know, I was noticing as I watched the inauguration, I was really torn, because I was raised with not from my parents actually, but just from the ether. I had patriotic pride, you know. these ideals. I would hear the Declaration of Independence and like cry. There's some good ideas in there. And so I was feeling very skeptical, actually, and nervous. Or I was watching, trying to not, I was getting swept up, and then I didn't want to be swept up because I wanted to be more cynical, because I thought that might safeguard me. And then just really opening actually into Kamala Harris being the vice president, long overdue and not quite enough. And yet we can celebrate that, you know. And Amanda Gorman being elevated to the world's attention, a young Black woman teacher, who, by the way, has said a while ago that she wants to run for president in 2036, in case you're thinking of who to vote for in 2036. I think she said that when she was like 17. But I was like, I'll vote for you. I'll vote for you in 2024. And that we can celebrate that. And actually, there is something about America that is making those changes happen also, right? And so it's not, our cynicism is not going to save us. But as Jan Willis mentions, hope has to be grounded in our action. You know? And I would say our action needs to be grounded in a clear discernment of our views. Yep, Donna, did you want to say something? And that we probably should wrap up.
This is Steve. I would like to say something.
Wait, can you just hang on 1 second, Steve? Just
I can.
Okay, so Donna and then Steve.
I just wanted to speak to the fact that I mentioned in one of the groups this recently that I cried through the whole day watching, and I did, and I had that in the back of my mind. What is wrong with me? Because it wasn't about this blind patriotism, and I came to what it was, and it was like just releasing all the pain of the Blackness that we've been experiencing, the darkness, I should say, and celebrating the jewels that I was seeing in terms of individuals and who were just remarkable people, and just really celebrating that, the goodness that is there. That's all, you know, and it wasn't blind. And it's then coming out of it with release and feeling like, oh, okay, now I'm ready to work again. There's a lot of work to do, and I'm ready to do it. So that's all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And Steve, please go ahead.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time last week talking to my 15-year-old grandson who's interested in history. And one of our biggest struggle, and the thing that I think people don't fully comprehend, even though they see it, is the fact that this country was built on racism. That why we have a Senate, why we have a House of Representatives built the way it is, why our government is put together the way it is, was purely because of racism. The smaller colonies, many of them in the South that had slave populations, didn't want to be overrun by the larger colonies in the North, in the Northeast. And that's a struggle that we're faced with, and to get past that. I'm not sure how we do it, except in little bits and pieces, because we'd have to go back and rebuild the structure of our government to get to a point where it was truly egalitarian, where one person, one vote. It's not that way now. My vote, your vote in California is basically useless on a national stage. And how that gets changed, I'm not sure, except we can do it in little bits and pieces by our actions.
Yeah. And in the midst of that effort, we feel.
Yes.
You know, really, like that it's transgressive and it's restorative to feel the pain of how that's always been so. And the stories that we've had that have glorified America have always been deceptive, actually, and that it's painful. Because I think that partly it's worked the way it has because denial is such a strong function in the collective dominant culture, cutting us off from feeling like this isn't right. So we can add that in.
Dōjin?
Oh, wait, sorry, just 1 sec. because I saw Thomas's hand before I heard your voice. So let's do Thomas, Holly, and then maybe that. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. And I know that I need to cultivate skillful view for now and for always. And I get so scared that I'm going to get stuck in trying to cultivate skillful view that I'll never get to action or skillful action. And so I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the days and weeks and months to come. But if you have any advice.
The thing that just quickly comes to thought is allow a feeling of circulation among the Eightfold Path. You know, when we sit zazen, that's the skillful. That's the quote eighth path of meditation or concentration. Allow that know that that's already helping. You know, right effort, right thinking, right livelihood, right view, and see. And when you're at work and you're doing what you do at work, and you're looking into things and you're challenging maybe racial dynamics at work, that, you know, like all those things weaving, there is a circulation, you know, and let them support each other. Okay, last, super last. Yeah, Holly, quickly, if you have something.
Okay, I just quickly, thank you for your talk, because it seemed to conflate racism and the economy and healthcare. And altogether, you know, they all need to be considered. What I wanted to bring up was an article I read in the Chronicle this morning about a company or whatever that decided to vaccinate all of its employees. And that was really great, except what I couldn't come together with was the company was a vineyard. And so they're vaccinating all their vineyard workers. And they're saying that's really good. But am I cynical to think maybe they're vaccinating all their workers so they'll be safe to work in their industry, in their vineyards, and they'll have enough people to, you know, get their wine out? It just struck me as strange. What's your thoughts about that?
Again, I would say that I don't think cynicism is going to bring us into a liberative process. I think discernment is. And there's a difference, and sometimes it's hard to see. I think it's okay to ask that question. But I think that, you know, the energy of cynicism, it has hierarchy in it. When we're cynical, we feel better than whatever it is we're looking at, I often feel. So that's not going to be overall a liberative process. So just keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, I get that, but I can't help but feel that there's this ulterior motive, you know, with these businesses. And I think that that's just another, you know, reflection of racism and economy and healthcare that come together in this strange way. Yeah. I just wonder if anybody else could see that.
Yeah. Right. Or yeah. And are people being vaccinated because they're valued as human beings, or because they're valued as workers and then commodities? Yeah. But again, like for us, the discernment for us is that same, look at the conditioning. It's hard to not feel that. It's hard to not feel that judgment because our conditioning is deep. Yeah. And we get to criticize. Like we can. We're allowed as bodhisattvas to criticize what we feel is wrong. But if we do that and it elevates us and puts someone else down, now we're off on the wrong track. So we keep a close eye on that. Well, thank you all so much for being here this morning and for staying with us. And I will, I'm going to post our closing chant in the chat. I'm going to try to, anyway. For great Bodhisattva